brutal hour spent trudging over hills of scrub-shrouded, gravelly slopes, you and Esperanza finally arrive at your long-sought-after destination. It perches atop the elevated land, eastward of the formidable Quitman Mountains, and stands before you, a decrepit wooden shed with white paint, dull and peeling from its walls. To your relief, it still has a roof, though much worse for wear than you had hoped. Its frame has succumbed to the ravages of time, surrendering to a gravitational pull that has left it sagging precariously to one side. Gaps yawn like silent, watchful eyes from around the cracked and weather-worn windows that flank the partially unhinged and only door. Fragments of the shattered structure lie strewn about the parched ground. A small lizard skitters underneath at your approach. Esperanza collapses onto a modest wooden ramp that leads into the building with a weary moan. It shudders with her weight, but the space provides shade, a welcome embrace after a long hike on battered and bruised limbs. You're not much better for wear, having carried your overstuffed backpack the entire trip, and your body has its own share of aches and pains from the past days of activity. You're amazed you can still stand at all. So this is it? Esperanza asks, motioning with a limp arm to the shed behind her, a clear look of disappointment as she squints up at you. You shrug. I know it's not much, but it's better than being out in the open. She sighs and wipes sweat and grime away from her forehead. I suppose you're right. Can you get me some fresh bandages? My gunshot is all raw again. You open a zippered pouch that's strapped to your belt with PAL's webbing. Both pouch and belt had been taken from the raiders' base the night before, along with other portions of your attire. I'm just glad you were wearing that helmet. You might not be here now otherwise, you say, looking at her with dead seriousness as you pass her a sealed roll of gauze. To your surprise, she glares back at you. You're not my father. I took care of myself well enough before you came along. She shakes her head with an exasperated sigh and focuses on rebandaging the wound on her leg. Thank you, though, she says after a long pause, for carrying me off from the wreck. She glances up at you with an apologetic look and a thin smile before turning her attention back to her wound. I'm just tired, that's all. She gives you a half grin as she undoes the top of a battered metal water bottle and takes a long swig from it. Perhaps she was right. Perhaps you had gotten a little too protective of her. The once familiar dirt roads that guided you to this place now lie entangled in a labyrinth of encroaching wilderness as nature reclaims its dominion over long-forgotten trails. You saw some signs of the heavy tires of the black futuristic vehicles early on, but they disappeared the closer you got to the shed. You hesitate to mention it to Esperanza for fear of reviving old ghosts of your past, but this humble shelter and the mere 5 acres of arid soil and tenacious shrubs it sat upon had once belonged to you. It was one of 2 places you kept in the lands surrounding Sierra Blanca, and the lesser used of the 2. Even then, it had only the most basic amenities: a roof, some cheap solar panels, and a 65-gallon translucent plastic water tank. Before the collapse, in an era now confined to sepia-tinged memories, you labored to erect this sanctuary with some help from your boys. From a stack of pre-cut materials secured through dealings with a big box store in El Paso. You recall the man who you eventually found to reluctantly deliver the pallets up to what even then were seen as treacherous dirt roads. All of it was now lying in ruin and disrepair, like the rest of your past. Incredibly, some stagnant yellowish water still remains in the water tank, which has lost its screw top. Below, several faint brown lines of previous water points caked along the inside. The remnants of the solar power setup you had installed long ago were now just a mess of dust, caked parts, and wires littering the ground. And as if to add insult to injury, someone had even stolen the panel itself. In retrospect, it all seemed silly. An electric pump to deliver water to a little sink inside. A light and a place to charge other devices, like a radio or wireless tools. you'd use to clear and tame the land. None of those things had really mattered in the end. Aside from the weathered mess the shed had become, it all looked nearly as raw and rough now as it had before you first set foot on the land decades ago. You shake yourself from your reminiscing and consider your best plan for the rest of the day. You know that Esperanza will want to head out as soon as you both can recover, just enough to set off once more. At least your shed offered an excellent view of the surrounding area that you hadn't had all morning, as you both had kept low to avoid the robots, or whatever the mysterious mechanical beings were that you'd encountered the night before. We can watch for vehicle movement from here, you say, producing compact binoculars and motioning to the windows. Esperanza nods as she devours the contents of another bag of chips taken from the raider's base and wipes the back of her hand across her lips. "Give me those," she says, a few bits of potato chips spraying from her mouth. She rises to her feet as you hand her the binoculars and trudges inside the shed, favoring her wounded leg. As you drop your heavy backpack just inside the entryway and prepare to follow Esperanza in, a solitary tree catches your eye from around the corner of the structure. You recognize the leaves as unlike any of the scrub trees normally found in the area. Defiantly and incredibly, it is bearing fruit. You walk around the edge of the building to admire it. It's laden with jujubes, succulent orbs that are a contrast to the rather thin and wilting foliage. As you reach out and grab a handful of the fruit, you feel a stirring of hope, a weak reminder of a feeling you had nearly forgotten, an obsession you once had with planting the trees and those drought-tolerant plants, like it, that had nearly faded after your son had gone. You carried the saplings even now, but more out of duty than passion. The tree is a puzzling enigma. Your eyes scan the rough ground, and you discover the reason for its unusual growth. Starting out narrow behind the cabin, perhaps the main reason it looked ready to collapse was a deep trench that had never been there before. You guessed, like the split in I-10, that it was caused by the weather anomalies since the collapse. Sudden, torrential, and lasting rains, in this case, coming off the Quitman Mountains. They had created the conditions for this tree to survive the Chihuahuan Desert without anyone to care for it. But the truly odd part is, you don't remember planting it, and it was too clean and straight, with old markings of pruning, to have come up from seed on its own. With the jujubes in hand, you step into the darkness of the shed. Esperanza sips at her water bottle between scanning the horizon outside with your binoculars. She glances at you. "Nothing yet," she says. Her hand shakes as she drinks. She's got to be worse off than she's letting on, but you know she won't stop. It's then that you notice the clear signs that someone had been living out of the shed, and not too long ago. There is a twisted and discolored sleeping bag set atop of a few layers of old blankets in a makeshift bed in one corner, none of which are yours. And yet, several items on the shelves, old jars and rusted tools, are arranged neatly. Despite their age, none of them are caked with the layers of dust you'd expect from a long lack of habitation. You find it odd, naggingly so. Squatters around the desert towns you'd seen rarely cared what condition abandoned buildings were left in. Empty shells of homes were easy to find, with the original residents mostly long dead. Whoever it was had made this shack home for an extended time, despite how little there was to survive off in the vicinity. Jujubes and occasional rainfall aside. You retrieve a pair of binoculars from beside a shiny metal mug on one of the shelves and look them over. They're familiar somehow, but you're sure you've never owned them. You peer out from a gap in the wall to the outside, which is blindingly bright, and rub the lenses with a corner of your shirt. With careful deliberation, you lift the binoculars and adjust them, bringing the world into sharper focus. Through the magnified view, the barren landscape unfolds before you. Hills and gravelly slopes stretch into the distance. Occasionally you see the telltale lines where a road had been overgrown, but no sign of vehicles or their passage. You scan from across the horizon and scour the mountainside closest to you, but like Esperanza, who does the same at the other window, You spot nothing of note. Time passes slowly, and you begin to wonder if, in your haste to avoid the robot things, you headed in the wrong direction. Your energy wanes, and you consider grabbing a bite to eat yourself. It's then that you notice a plume of dust rising in the air, billowing toward the majestic ridge of mountains. Encouraged, you fix your gaze upon it, eager to make out the shadow of a vehicle from behind the cover of sun-bleached hills. To your astonishment, the dust cloud heralds the approach of a formidable convoy. Multiple black military vehicles dominate the scene, their sleek forms weaving through the rugged terrain. After only a short time, they slow. EB, but it's the figures that the vehicles roll up to, and the sheer number of them, that leave you dumbfounded. Robots, you can only assume, clad in the same black military attire, move with uncanny precision, the visors on their helmets reflecting the harsh sunlight. Their presence hints at a hub of activity concealed within the mountains themselves, a secret enclave, though you see no structures of any kind from your vantage point. You wonder if you finally found the home of the so-called scientists you heard the raider leader speak of, realizing with a rising anxiety the danger posed by the proximity of this bustling hive of technology and military might to your current location. You turn to Esperanza, your voice laden with apprehension. "You won't believe what I just saw," you say. "There's a whole army of robots, and I see them also," she interjects. Her hands tremble, but her grip on the binoculars only tightens as she speaks. "We can't waste any time. We have to go after my Naily. I know they're keeping her there." You stride over and grasp Esperanza's arm, urging caution. "Esperanza, listen. You know we can't just charge in there. We need a plan to get through all that down there." She shakes free of your grip. Her eyes burn with fierce determination, her emotions teetering on the edge of control. "We can't," she starts before correcting herself. "I can't wait any longer. My daughter is there, and every second we waste." Her face clouds over. Who knows what they're doing to her? She grabs for a holstered 45 ACK pistol she took off one of the raiders, and her face clouds over with a grim frown. "I'll kill them all. I get it, Esperanza. Believe me, I do. But we need to be smart about this. I know what I saw after the crash. I don't even know if those things can be killed. We'll have a better chance getting past them if we approach under the cover of darkness, using the night as our ally. For all we know, they can see in the dark too. And fly." She crosses her arms in frustration. Then you see a flicker of something, understanding perhaps, as she looks up deeply into your eyes. Fatigue etches lines of exhaustion on her face, and she finally relents, her shoulders dropping and her voice filled with resignation. "All right, John. I'll trust your judgment," she says, reaching up after a pause to stroke your bearded face. "But promise me, once we rest and the night comes, we won't waste any more time here." You nod, a mixture of relief and concern flooding your thoughts. "Rest now. We both need it. We'll sleep, gather our strength, and head out when the time is right." You offer the pile of blankets in the corner to her as a bed, but she shakes her head, choosing to curl up in a tattered padded chair beside a window instead. "You're sure?" You ask, though your own aching limbs do yearn for the comfort she's refused. She gives you a thin smile and shakes her head, no, motioning for you to use the bed for your own. "You had a hard night carrying me, John. You deserve it." You chuckle and undo your belt and plate carrier, lightening your load for some much-needed sleep. You prop your head up with your backpack, fingers laced behind your neck. There's still something that bothers you about this shack and its previous inhabitant, something you can't quite place. You're too tired to think much more on it. You turn on your side for sleep's sweet embrace, but find yourself stymied. Despite your exhaustion, the floor beneath you is intolerably lumpy and uncomfortable. You roll away and pull aside the sheets, cursing at a raised section of flooring that had been jabbing your side. The floor is composed of large sections of MDF wood, but the portion with the corner sticking up from it had been sawed into its own small segment. Few others might have spotted this detail, but you knew it was out of place, having laid down the floor yourself. You dig your fingernails into the flooring and raise it. Beneath, you're surprised to find a small framed section which has been added to the shed's pier and beam foundation. But it's the discovery of the long, narrow wooden chest under that fills you with wonder. This thing you do recognize. You lift it out carefully. It is heavier than it should be, but you manage to remove it from the space beneath the floor. You sweep aside a thick layer of dust and dirt with your gloved hand. Carefully you open it. The seal cracks, and you're amazed to see that it is still completely clean within. Inside, you find a couple of items, but one sticks out. It's the first lever, action rifle you gave your son long ago, a 20-tool Henry Mare's leg, short enough to be strapped to your side and held in place with the leg holster, which also rests inside the chest. It's all still in great shape. It's even been cleaned and oiled, but wiped down well so that the ever-present desert dust would not to cling to its surface, just like you had taught your son. You lift the weapon out of the velvet-lined case and see a handful of copper bullion rounds, coins of glittering orange underneath. A fold of velvet also falls aside to reveal a 5-pound copper bar with a sandblasted surface texture and a strange but familiar logo of a man in a gas mask with a cowboy hat. There is no question in your mind now. It all makes sense. At some point your son had returned here. You can't know for sure when, but you allow yourself a small glimmer of hope. You stare at these pieces of the past that somehow managed to survive. Hardly a weapon to fight robots with, but you used to claim you could shoot the hair off a fly with a proper cheek weld, the short rifle just up below your eye. Look what I found, you say, a broad grin across your face. You almost want to tell her more, but you hold back. Esperanza tips her head and smiles, but does not move from her spot where she's settled in. She's writing something on a notepad. It's beautiful, she says, nodding at you. This place was yours once. How did you know? You tread here differently. And the way you hold that, it's easy to see you know this place. You're right, you chuckle despite yourself. There's a part of my past here. But was it all the past, you wonder? Could Warren have made it? Was it the robots he encountered, and he escaped from them to this shed? You allow yourself to be filled with hope for the first time in many moons. What are you writing there? You ask Esperanza. I write a note each night to my daughter. When we meet, I will pass them to her, so she knows I never stop thinking of her. You nod with understanding. You wrote letters to your own son and dropped them off at a mailbox near Sierra Blanca. It was your way of communicating with one another. Once you decided to split up in order to plant more trees across the settlements. The biggest mistake I ever made, you think to yourself. If you had stayed with him, he might be here, right now, at your side. Well, I can barely keep my eyes open, you say, closing up the chest and pulling it alongside your bedding. Please wake me if I sleep too long. Esperanza nods with a smile, still writing her note. With that, you quickly surrender to the embrace of sleep. But as the veil of slumber envelops you, little do you know that your fragile unity will soon be shattered, leaving you alone to face the ghosts of your past and an uncertain future. As the strong desert winds of late night whistle through the cracks in the aged wooden walls, you stir from your restless sleep. Groggy and disoriented, your eyes scan the dark interior of the shed, searching for Esperanza's familiar form. She is nowhere to be found. Panic rises in your chest, tightening its grip around your heart. A sinking feeling settles deep within you. Frantically, you search the cluttered space, hoping to find some clue, some explanation for her sudden departure. And then you spot it. A crumpled piece of paper lying atop an overturned crate. It is a handwritten note bearing Esperanza's distinctive penmanship. You pick up the note, your hands trembling as you unfold it, tracing the lines of her words. John, I'm not one for sappy goodbyes. but it's time I gave you some thanks. You've been solid, dependable, and I appreciate it more than I let on. You're a rare man. Sorry for leaving like this, without much explanation. I have got to go to my daughter, no matter the cost. And yeah, I had to take your pistol to make sure you don't tail me into danger. You search your holster, and sure enough, it's gone. We saw what those black-clad robots, or scientists, or whatever they are, did in Eurispa. I won't let them take you down for my sake. I'm doing what's best for both of us, and my Daily. I won't forget you. Maybe our paths will cross again someday, and we'll share a story or two. And maybe I'll owe you something more, if this all works out. Maybe. If you promise to keep that beard trimmed. Take care out there, John. Appreciatively, Esperanza. As you read her words, conflicting emotions swirl within you. Anger, fear, and something more. You snatch up your supplies as quickly as possible and exit the shed into the night. Without a sidearm, you grab the only two things at hand, the 22 mare's leg and the 5-pound brick of copper. As you move swiftly through the darkness, your senses honed with determination, your heart feels like it's going to leap out of your chest. You're overwhelmed with the sense that you've lost something and might never get it back. The moon momentarily breaks free from its cloudy shroud and casts a faint illumination on the rugged terrain. With bated breath, you stop on another hill and raise the binoculars to your eyes once more, scanning the silhouette of the mountainous ridge ahead. And then, there it is. A glimpse of movement, a chilling sight that sends a jolt of adrenaline coursing through your veins. Through the magnified view of the binoculars, you spot Esperanza, her distant but distinct figure framed by the dark shadows of towering mountains. She's surrounded by a halo of projected light and a menacing cluster of the black-clad robots, the glint of their lenses and the cold precision of their movements betraying their inhuman nature. You lower the binoculars, your grip tightening on them until your knuckles turn white. Your jaw clenches, and you swallow bitterly. You watch, helpless, as both Esperanza and the robots move away, the artificial lights enveloping her eventually swallowed by the dark, overlapping hills below. As soon as the pale white glow disappears from view, you ready yourself. All the weariness and pain in your old bones melts away. Determination, adrenaline, and a confused jumble of feelings override any concern for your own well-being. After a moment of hastily adjusting your gear, you chuckle despite yourself and skitter down the hillside. If I'm going to die anyway, it might as well be tonight.